Hey everyone, welcome to a new chess video. I've discovered an opening that's going to fascinate you. What you see here on the screen is a variation of the bishop's opening. It's very easy to play and extremely hard for your opponents to stop, since they can make way too many mistakes. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to get to this position, how to play this opening in a very simple way, and how to punish all those mistakes your opponent might make so you can end up winning the game. First, how do we get to this position, chess teacher? Look how simple it is. We play the king's pawn, right? Double king's pawn, and now we start with the bishop's opening. Very well. Now our opponent can play a lot of different options, and in fact, what I'm about to explain works against most of them. However, what do people play most often when we use this bishop to c4 in the bishop's opening? Well, it's very simple. Normally, when we play knight to f3, I'll explain it simply so everyone can understand, we're attacking this square. That's why they're forced to defend. And that's why white has the initiative. The attack and black defends. Alright, when instead of attacking, we play bishop to c4, we're giving our opponent the chance to attack instead of defend, okay? You could also use this opening with a certain variation if they play knight to c6, alright? But normally, they'll play knight to f6, because now they're the ones attacking. And this is where, instead of defending this pawn, we're going to play d4, the queen's pawn, and this is where it all begins. It looks like we're giving away a pawn. They can also capture here. They can defend with knight to c6. They have a lot of options. The good thing is that I'm going to show you how to play against all of them, and you'll actually want your opponents to play all these variations, because you'll see that you're really going to like them. Which one is the most logical of all? We're giving away a pawn, chess teacher, so what happens if they capture it, right? Well, that's great. This is the main line. So what happens if they capture the pawn? What happens is that now we're going to continue by taking their pawn with our pawn. In other words, first of all, we're not down a pawn anymore because yes, they captured one, but now we're attacking another one. So it's not so clear that they actually have an extra pawn. And here, in this position, there are a lot of mistakes, like the obvious knight to c6, which I'm sure many of you are thinking about, developing a knight, attacking a pawn, but this is already a serious mistake, and it's very easy to punish. All you have to do is sacrifice this bishop on f7, check, drawing out the king. If they don't capture, even better, right? Notice that right now, not yet, because we have this knight here, but there would be tactical themes after driving away this knight, and on top of that, we'd be up a pawn. So they have to capture this bishop, and once they do, we come in with the queen, check, and we're gonna gobble up this knight no matter where it goes. So in conclusion, if they play knight to c6, we simply end up with an extra pawn. Plus, our opponent loses the right to castle, meaning it's a completely winning position. But what happens, chess teacher? I'm going to rewind just a bit, because that way, yeah, we spend 20 more seconds, it's true, but the line becomes much clearer, right? Bishop to c4, we start with developing the bishop. They play knight to f6, attacking this point, right? And now, what are we simply going to do? d4. See how simple that is, right? There's nothing to lose here. So here, when they capture, we'll just capture back. And we've just seen, right? That knight to c6 was a mistake. But there's another move that people have played against me a lot, and it's an even bigger mistake. What I do when I make these videos is first I study the opening, then I try it out in my online games and see what my opponents play most often. So here, I'm going to show you how to punish these mistakes. And one move that people have played against me a lot, which is a really serious mistake, is d5. Here, what they're doing is developing their central pawn while defending this knight and also defending this bishop. They don't realize that, of course, we've diverted the queen's pawn and now two pieces are attacking this point. In other words, we're winning a pawn. And why am I telling you this if it's so easy? Well, because I can assure you that people are going to play d5 against you. Some of you will be tempted to capture en passant, especially in blitz. If they play d5, you can take this pawn. On top of that, you attack this knight, and when it moves back, that's not the end of it. You have a way to finish the game, not just by winning an extra pawn, okay? The way is very simple. Give this video a like if you enjoy this kind of content. If we reach 300 likes, I'll bring you an amazing opening that I'm currently studying right away. So come on, how do we finish this off for good? Well, with the same bishop sacrifice, although now it's very different, and I'm going to explain why. Notice that this bishop sacrifice comes up very often in this opening. In other words, if you really understand the concepts, you'll be able to use all these so-called traps that this opening has. Or rather than traps, it means your opponent has made a mistake and we're going to punish it. Simply put, here, if they take the bishop, we would win the queen for free. That's why they can't capture it. So they have no choice but to move forward, and now it would be the other bishop that comes in, and once again we would end up winning the queen for free, since here we force them to take this pawn, and simply bishop takes queen, we end up with a free queen. That's how simple it is. If they play d5, they lose the queen. Now you're going to be amazed. Do you know what the most common move is here in this position when we play this opening? Well, it's neither knight to c6, which we've seen how to punish, nor d5, which loses the queen after bishop takes pawn. Do you know what it is? Bishop to c5. They develop their bishop and take advantage of having a knight here in a good position to hit us with this massive double attack. What they don't know is that we're going to strike back with a counterattack, a triple attack. Bishop to c5 is also a serious mistake. As you can see, it's way too easy for them to make a mistake in this opening. That's why it's so good. Queen to d5 wins the game immediately. It attacks f7, which would be checkmate. You see it, right? It threatens checkmate. Not only that, but it also attacks the knight. If they move the knight, we're also attacking the bishop. In other words, we have a triple threat that's practically impossible to stop. Here, usually, for example, if they try to come here, we deliver checkmate, right? If they try to give us this check, it's super important. We have to say, we need to be careful here, right? They have a counterattack. Well, it's actually very simple. All we're going to do is move the king. Because they give us check, we move the king, but the threat's still ours. We're threatening checkmate, and we're threatening the knight. It's obvious they'd rather lose the knight, right? Than lose to checkmate. That's obvious. So what are they going to do? Well, castle to stop the checkmate. Look how simple it's going to be to finish this game. Now we take the knight. We have an extra piece, but that's not even the most important thing. We're leaving a bishop that needs to retreat, for example, here to avoid problems. And now we're going to continue with our development. But the idea behind this development is that yes, we have an extra piece, but the attack against our opponent is going to be absolutely unstoppable. In other words, we're going to end up delivering checkmate. As you can see, we've forced our opponent to castle because we were threatening checkmate, and the only way to stop it was by castling. And now, once they've castled, they have no defending pieces. In other words, besides having an extra piece, we have a totally brutal attack. For example, here if they try to play c6 to play d5, it really doesn't matter at all what they play, because we're going to play bishop to d3, creating this huge checkmate threat, forcing our opponent to weaken themselves even more. And here we have a spectacular plan: bring the bishop in to attack a queen that has to move. They might try to come over to defend, but it really doesn't matter to us because we just want to place our bishop here, taking advantage of the weak squares. So what's the plan going to be when you launch this attack? Well, it's simply to try to checkmate in order to weaken the king. And once it's weakened, look how the dark squares are. Now we bring in the bishop and we're simply going to finish by delivering checkmate. It doesn't matter to us no matter what they do. We move here to get in and deliver checkmate. And if they play this move, just look at this marvel of humanity. Check this out, huh? Incredible, right? Queen takes pawn. We sacrifice the queen. A totally impressive double exclamation mark move. And why do you sacrifice the queen, CHESSTEACHER? What do you have here if you have nothing? Well, if they capture your queen, which is obvious, because if not, we're going to come in and deliver mate, we simply bring in the knight and just wait for it, okay? Watch out for this, okay? We're going to checkmate with the bishops and the knight. I'm sure you've never seen a checkmate here on the castled king with bishops and a knight. You'll see, the king can't move to any square, and no matter what they do, we simply deliver checkmate with this bishop. Impressive. Remember the star move? d4. Now let's see what happens if, instead of capturing with the knight, they exchange these two pawns, which is also very common, okay? But first, you should know something. A mistake that has been made against me several times. And this is quite a serious mistake. Even though it's obvious, people still play it. We're attacking here, and some play knight to c6. You can see this isn't a very good move. In fact, all of you are probably noticing this already. However, if you don't know how to react, you might make mistakes, play badly, and end up losing. That is, this is very easy to punish. I'll explain it to you in 30 seconds. Look how easy it is! If they play knight to c6 against this opening, you should simply push forward. Don't capture, okay? Don't capture, or they'll get a good position. If knight takes e5, attacking our c4 bishop, we just push d5, attacking the knight. And here, there are two common retreats. The best is e7, but notice how their position is still pretty bad. This bishop can't get out, this knight can't come out again, and that's the best option, alright? If they play this move, just keep playing normally. You'll have a huge space advantage. For example, knight to f3, and we keep putting on the pressure. What are the two most popular moves? Well, one of the most popular is knight to d4, which is a huge mistake, because after c3, this knight gets trapped. We're gonna win a knight, alright? See how easy that is, huh? We push forward, and if it comes here, we trap it. And the other, and the most commonly played move, is knight to a5. And I'm sure you're all thinking, well, this move looks really good, because not only do I get out of the threat, but I also attack this bishop. In practice, it's not such a bad move. However, we have an advantage here of, what do you call it? Initiative. And I'm gonna explain how. We move the bishop to d3. Even though it might seem like a waste of time, the opponent can keep developing. What we're gonna do is fight against this nummy. First, c3, a multifunctional move. It opens the way for the queen, threatens, especially before, to win a piece with this fork. So they absolutely have to react by moving this bishop. And we don't care where they go, because simply, bishop 4 wins the knight. As you can see, if they bring the knight to a5, they get into trouble, because this knight is going to end up trapped. That is, here we could even play knight f3 to put pressure here, and they would absolutely have to defend. And now, for example, before, and look at the position. Not only do we end up with an extra piece, but we also have a position that's 1,000 times better. Alright, chess teacher, let's get down to business. What happens if, when I play this wonderful opening, instead of capturing here or making a big mistake, they capture this pawn, which I see happen a lot. Pawn exchange, and that's it. Should I recapture with the couve? Careful. Recapturing with the queen doesn't seem like the best idea, since simply knight to c6 develops a piece and gains a tempo against us. We should keep defending this point. For example, bringing the queen over here doesn't seem like the best idea, right? So let's see, CHESSTEACHER, what should I do? Because not only do they have an extra pawn and I can't recapture it, they're also threatening another one. I'm gonna end up 2 pawns down. What a messy opening, CHESSTEACHER. Well, no, it's quite simple. Once they capture, we play knight f3, and here we have a nice advantage. And I'm going to explain what it's all about. First of all, how should we react if they capture this pawn and we're 2 pawns down? Now, yes, it's time to capture this pawn with the queen. Why? Well, precisely because now they don't have time to play knight to c6 to attack our queen, since we would just capture that knight, and on top of that, with check. We'd be up a piece, and with check too. That's why they have to move this bishop back. Also, this knight, playing here doesn't work for them because we simply attack it with 2 pieces, right? So we just do this and that's it. So they have to move this knight back, and they have 2 squares, f6 and d6. Let's see how to play against both, because they're really simple. What happens if they play knight to d6? We're just gonna castle, okay? Very good. Knight to c6, for example, attacking the queen, and we're not even going to move her. Here we already have a position that's way too easy to attack. Instead of moving the queen away, rook to e1, bringing the rook into the attack. Look at the development advantage we have in exchange for a pawn. Check, they have to block no matter what. And once they block, we could bring the queen in through g7, attacking the rook, and we're going to end up capturing that rook no matter what, because even if it moves, we can bring in the other bishop, and that rook is going to get taken. And not only that, but look, if, for example, they capture this bishop, that would be checkmate. You can't capture with the king because the bishop is there, and you can't capture with the bishop because our rook is pinning it. Impressive. So when we take this pawn with the queen, we've seen that knight to d6 was a bad move. Knight to f6 is much better. Come on, chess teacher, learn to set up the pieces, because you look like a beginner. How do you have 2 white bishops? What's going on here? Will they eat one another or what? This bishop was here to guide them. This is how it is, alright? This is how it is, right? Now we take here, and this knight has to move. We've seen that here, it was a mistake. This is the good one. How do we continue? I realized it because the move that should follow now is this bishop here pinning this knight. If my other bishop were here, I couldn't use it, right? Good. The right move, bishop to g5, pinning the knight. We're putting a lot of pressure here, aren't we? Bishop takes knight. We'd be doubling pawns because the queen is also putting on pressure. It's definitely the most logical move, right? Bishop to e7. Also, this bishop can't get out elsewhere because here, c3 forces a retreat. Here we'd capture it, and here it blocks this pawn. So bishop to e7 is the move that's always used in this position. A plan you should remember, knight to c3 and castle long, okay? So what could they play against you here? Well, here they could play all sorts of things, but at some point they're gonna make a logical move. Knight to c6, developing this knight and attacking our queen. They're gonna make this move sooner or later, right? Because they're never gonna want to come out this way. So knight to c6. Chess teacher, where should I put this queen? Well, this queen should go on the attack. Serious question, can they play h6? They aren't really threatening the bishop because if they take it, we just take the rook. That's a disaster. So h6 is useless. For example, if they castle, then they could play h6, but it doesn't really bother us, right? Long castle. If you follow the plan, look how simple it is, huh? We castle long, and now we simply don't have to worry. Rather, we won't have to suffer about pushing these pawns forward and attacking here because the king is safe on the other side. That's why we can attack so strongly on this side. What happens if they play h6, chess teacher? Well, in this case, we could even sacrifice the bishop because the attack is unstoppable. And we have a really beautiful maneuver. For example, here, if they try to... Now we're threatening to come in with everything, right? With the knight, with the bishop, with the rook. If they try to bring the knight over here, attack the queen, attack here with this double threat, they simply lose the knight because we have this wonderful move taking advantage of this bishop on c4 that pins this f-pawn. Simply, this move would win the knight, so they can't bring the knight here. And if it goes to h7, right? Which also seems pretty interesting, stopping any kind of knight jump since they're occupying this square with the knight, the bishop, and the queen. Then comes a fantastic maneuver, a really beautiful move that we rarely see in chess. Normally, we bring the rook over on the 3rd rank, right? In this case, we bring it over on the 5th rank. We bring the rook over on the 5th. It doesn't matter if we block the bishop because this attack is already unstoppable. Not only are we threatening this spot here, but now what we want is to bring the rook to this square. And you tell me, even if you were Magnus Carlsen, how do you stop this attack here? Because no matter how much you move the knight, I'm going to checkmate you on the back rank. In other words, this threat of bringing the rook over here would be checkmate no matter what. You can sacrifice the bishop if they play h6 after they've castled. Alright, something really important, friends. Here, when they capture and we play knight to f3, we've seen what happens if they take this pawn, which at first glance seemed totally free, right? They might capture, but they also might not. Chess teacher, don't forget this. If they don't capture, they have to be very careful, though, that we don't push to pressure this knight, because it could be too dangerous, right? So here, if they don't capture, they're going to play d6, precisely to prevent this kind of advance. And here we have an attack that, well, for computers, sure, they'll be able to stop it, but I still haven't found a human being who can stop it with authority. We have the typical attack, right? It's like a blindfold attack, but in this case, it's much more powerful since the lines, well, sometimes, depending on how we use them, right, are stronger than others because there are different tempos of advantage. For example, here, how can they defend this point we're attacking with the bishop and the knight? Well, the truth is they only have one move, since, for example, bishop here wouldn't work because we'd capture it with 2 pieces, right? So the only move they have is to play d5. Yes, it's true, here it's just an exchange, but now knight takes pawn is a serious mistake. Knight takes pawn is a serious mistake. A lot of you are probably thinking this would be similar to the fried liver attack, and you'd play knight takes on f7, and after king takes, we'd come in with the queen and all that, right? Well, no, here there's a much stronger move, short castling. We bring another piece into the attack. Why is castling so strong here? Because we're threatening rook e1, and they have to block with bishop e7. However, now knight takes f7 actually works. After castling, it's stronger. We have a double attack now. What's next? They're forced to capture if they don't want to lose material. And once they capture, we simply bring in the queen, queen to h5, check. If the king moves, we take here. If they play g6 first, we can take here first, right? Hidden check. And here, the most common move is for the king to go this way, although whatever they do, we're going to end up winning. In this case, simply bishop to h3, bishop to h6, check. And when the king moves, queen to g5, checkmate. Playing with the board flipped is really messing me up with the coordinates. Sorry about that. Alright, chess teacher, I can't leave this video without you explaining the following to me. Here, after this opening we're using, right? From before, which honestly I don't know the name of. If anyone knows, let me know in the comments, because I have no idea. So what happens, right? We've seen all the variations. We're in the exchange variation, and now we played knight to f3. We've seen the following. Capturing. We've seen d6, but we still need to see what happens if they let us push this pawn, because you just told me a moment ago they should play d6 to prevent this advance. But what happens if they don't stop it? For example, bishop to c5 seems like a really, really good move. So let's push forward. This is obvious. This knight isn't great here, because we can just attack it with our queen or bishop. It has no good retreat squares, so we'll likely win it. So, for example, it might come over here to attack this pawn. That seems a lot more logical. Alright, what are we gonna do when it comes here? Well, it's really simple. We just chase it away, and it has two options. One, retreat over here, in which case we could just capture it and double the pawns, or even better, bring the bishop to attack this queen. And that would already be a problem, because they'd have to sacrifice here, the king would be exposed, double attack, it would be chaos. Or the other option it has, which I've actually come across, okay? I found knight takes f2, thinking, okay, I have two extra pawns. Black thinks, right, in exchange for a knight, I have strong discoveries now, right? What if they play this against you? Where does the king go? Because you only have one good square. Remember this well, okay? If some cocky player sacrifices their knight to try to get counterplay, the only good square is to come forward here. Very simple. They're simply going to exchange this pawn so they don't end up a pawn down. And now we have two pawns for the piece. That is, we have a material advantage. But not only that, even though the king looks exposed, they can't attack it with anything. And not only that, but we're the ones attacking. For example, now we're threatening bishop takes on f7, check, and when they capture, this bishop on c5 gives a discovered attack, winning, now for real, another pawn, right? This one here. So then, here, what do they have to do? Well, they have to castle, and once they castle, we simply jump in with the knight, and our threats are obvious. We're threatening this checkmate. And not only that, but we're also threatening over here, so that when everything gets exchanged, we're back to the same situation. A discovered attack here, bishop takes rook, check, king takes on f7, and queen takes on c5, winning this bishop. We would simply bring in the other rook, the bishop, the queen, and this would end up being checkmate. But not only that, notice that we have two rooks and our opponent only has one. So we have a rook in exchange for two pawns. No, actually, just in exchange for one pawn. In other words, we have a completely overwhelming advantage. I hope you enjoyed this opening as much as I enjoyed recording it. I loved it. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, since watching these kinds of videos and learning from them is totally free. Subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss any of the videos, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video. Goodbye, friends.